This is Sexy Funny Raw, where we chat all about the world of sex, from dating and relationships all the way to the adult industry itself. I'm Silvia Saige, and this is my Pornspective, answering all the questions you weren't even brave enough to ask Google. Get ready, because Sexy Funny Raw starts now.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Sexy Funny Raw. I'm your host, Silvia Saige, and joined with me in studio, of course, is my co-host, Dr. Eddie, giving us his public health perspective. Thank you, Dr. Eddie. And in studio, I am very pleased to welcome our guest for this month. He is actor, comedian, and chef, actually. Mr. Dan Faustian, everyone. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I don't know that you're necessarily going to want to be here for this particular episode, but we're going to get into it regardless.
Ooh.
So, a little scary this episode's going to be, at least for me or anyone who is sexually active. It should be a little bit scary for you. So, there is a new strain, folks, going around of super gonorrhea. It sounds terrifying because it is. Okay. So we all know that there is obviously just a regular strain of gonorrhea. That's the one that we all know and nobody loves, right? And Dr. Eddie, tell us what the normal gonorrhea signs, symptoms go through.
So gonorrhea is actually the second most common sexual
next to
infection. Chlamydia.
Okay.
I've had that one.
And so, but it changes all the time. When I was doing research, it was like syphilis had gone up to number 1 and chlamydia was number 3. So it's like a constant change depending on what state and a variety of other variables.
Okay.
So across the nation, it's the second most.
Okay.
But per state, it's pretty different. Here in California, there used to be billboards that said, we're number 2 in chlamydia right outside of the airport. So whenever I was visiting, I was always like, that's so awesome that it's a billboard. Awesome from a public health perspective.
Not from like a bragging. We're
like,
number 2.
Mom,
Yeah.
Mom, Dad, look.
We're number 2.
Told you LA rocked. Come on.
Someone's having fun.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the basic symptoms with that are going to be like painful urination, discharge for men and women.
Yeah.
It could present a problem if it's untreated. Long term.
Wait, can I also just say it's also you can have no symptoms, because I've had gonorrhea several times with zero symptoms.
So it happened to my roommate.
Definitely.
He tested positive, but he didn't.
Yeah.
It's quite common.
He had no idea.
It's quite common to have no symptoms, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
I want to say, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's 10% of people have no symptoms at all.
Okay.
So that's actually a pretty big number.
Yeah.
If we're talking per 100,000, which are usually the numbers we're working with in public health.
Yeah.
And so it's also known as the clap. Some people confuse that all the time.
I have been confusing that until I read this script. I was like, clap is not chlamydia? That would make all the sense.
Nice.
The clap is gonorrhea?
It is.
Remember that Clash song? Yeah.
It's so crazy to me. I learned something new today, and that's so embarrassing. I worked in hospitals, y'all. It's so embarrassing.
Well, but not everybody that works in your own defense. Not everyone that works in hospitals deals with STIs.
Right.
Not all physicians necessarily deal with STIs as well. So
I wasn't in
cut
that
yourself some
field.
slack.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
So, but what we're talking about when we're talking about super gonorrhea, it's like a fantastical name.
Yeah.
But really what we're talking about is drug-resistant gonorrhea.
So it doesn't necessarily have different, like you're not going to have like a blood coming out. It's fine.
As I'm throwing pens.
It's fine. It's not going to be a worse kind of gonorrhea.
No. Well, worse in that you can't cure it.
It will never go away.
And so to explain that, what I have to explain is antibiotic resistance.
Right.
This is a little bit sciencey, so I'll try and keep
Go for it.
Okay. So antibiotic resistance means when we don't use antibiotics the right way, or when we don't complete our antibiotic regimen or whatever, usually the remaining bacteria, in this case, are the ones that end up multiplying. Those remaining bacteria are the ones that the antibiotics didn't kill. So whatever few ones are left become the new ones that are multiplying in our systems. Antibiotics resistance thus means those that are left are stronger against antibiotics.
And now those strong ones are making new...
It's like the delta of gonorrhea.
I mean, Sure, but if you want to say that Delta was stronger, right? Because Delta had a bunch of variants.
yeah.
They weren't necessarily resistant to things. It was just the new strain.
So
that
now
evolved.
basically, if you get super gonorrhea, you need kryptonite if you want to cure it.
So the problem then becomes
Sorry,
when
I
we're
had
dealing
to.
with
No,
antibiotics.
yeah. But honestly, because there will be no cure, right?
There will be no. So recently in January of 2023, this superbug in public health, we call it drug resistant.
Okay.
But super gonorrhea within this context
Yeah.
finally made it to the U.S. It had kind of been going around the rest of the world
Okay.
for a couple of years.
We were late to the party.
We were a little late to the party, thankfully.
Right.
So there was two
first.
cases. There was 2 cases in Massachusetts. What ends up happening is, think of it like a list of 10 different types of antibiotics. And you're going down the list of not necessarily strength, but variation. Eventually you get to like the last few, which is like our last line of defense when
Yeah.
we're talking about dealing with bacterial infections. And so once we get to those, there are no other options. This super gonorrhea strain, it's taking those last lines of defense that we have
Yeah.
to kill it. So they were treated in the 2 cases in Massachusetts recently. So they don't have it anymore.
Great.
The problem is that it's certainly possible
Okay.
for it to spread. Because they also said that these 2 cases weren't related to each other, from what I understand.
Yeah.
So if they're not related to each other, they got it somehow. But of course, the way that
Someone's
we're
still out there.
constantly traveling.
Yeah. If there's
Right?
more than one person still out there, yeah.
Sure.
They probably
So
don't have any. They're probably one of that 10% without the symptoms.
It's certainly possible.
There's no way you're
and
gonna
they're
eat
probably
and it's
funny, so
burned.
they're fucking a lot of people.
Yeah.
You know? So
Well, there would be more cases theoretically if they
okay.
were
Funny.
right, because symptoms actually show up pretty quick and all of that stuff. So,
A horrible person.
but all of that is to say that we don't really invest in antibiotics anymore.
Yeah.
Right? In like 19.
But why?
Well, in 1928, when Alexander Fleming, discovered antibiotics in the
Yeah.
first place, which was based on fungus and et cetera, we then started to use antibiotics in a variety of ways, and we started using it the most during the World War, and so we really ramped up production because that was one of the biggest challenges that Alexander Fleming encountered in 1928. He just didn't know how to mass produce these things.
Yeah.
So what we ended up doing eventually, 20 years later, or a little bit less than 20 years, when we figured out how to mass produce it, we started putting it in everything. It really changed the military, changed surgery.
But when you
penicillin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
so break it down. When you say started using it and everything, you were
Well, and so now we actually get it a lot in our food, and it's in our environment based on how.
so it's
we
literally
treat-
we're taking it in every day.
So if you eat meat, the chances are even higher because we treat a lot of our animals with broad spectrum antibiotics constantly to prevent disease, because in a lot of instances they're
They live in-
mistreated.
yeah, they live in bad
really
conditions, yeah.
horrible squalor, these poor animals. And if they're mistreated and they don't have a place to walk and to graze and to be free, then they're in confined spaces with filth and all of
Yeah.
those things. You give them antibiotics. You can also pump them full of antibiotics to make them bigger.
Yeah.
And so all of these things combined create an environment where we're taking in antibiotics all of the time.
That's bad.
At such a high rate, our bodies are just building up
And
immunity.
but we're not creating more antibiotics. And so
we're
running
just creating an immunity of our own.
But we're not really commuting. That's not how immunity necessarily functions. So we're not creating an immunity ourselves to all of these things.
Okay.
Because bacteria is going to be different from our microbiome. All of those things are slightly different from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
We're calling it super gonorrhea. What we're really talking about is drug-resistant gonorrhea.
Yeah.
The problem is we're not investing in it, and we're often taking in a lot of antimicrobials.
So how do we how do we keep from this happening? How do we keep from this taking over?
This is the problem because, as we've discussed many times, there is no way around it, and we've really talked about PrEP, and
Just
we've talked about all of these incredible
Living in a
things.
whole new world of fear over here, but
so-
all right.
This one warrants a little bit of fear, right?
Yeah.
And so a little bit of caution, only because it's almost inevitable that it's going to mutate again, where those last lines of defense aren't going to work, right? So that's part one. So part two
Yeah.
is really that it's in our environment and we're constantly taking it in. People aren't using it right, but we also have a medical industry that prescribes it a lot. So like the number one reason that we have antibiotic resistance kind of developing, even though it's been developing since Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin.
Yeah.
He even said, but this is going to be a problem. So we've known it was going to be a problem from then, that these strains are going to mutate, but we don't really do anything about it. And so...
So we need to get somebody in science on this. Is
I'm
what
working
you're
on
saying.
it.
Dr. Fauci,
Yeah.
where are you at?
Well, Dr. Fauci's been doing... Actually, he's done incredible work. Since the 80s, he's been doing incredible work. He was like instrumental in our fight against the HIV epidemic at the time.
So, right, if we can take HIV from something that was such a deadly disease to something that is completely livable now,
Sure.
like, can we not like make the same strides with this detrimental gonorrhea?
Invest in it. Well, we're going to have to invest in it. And so COVID really changed the world.
Right.
But it was a temporary change because before that, we'd gone through decades of not investing in public health.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a little biased, everybody, right? But we hadn't been investing in public health and so then all of a sudden COVID happened and we're like, our infrastructure isn't built for this. Like our public health infrastructure isn't built to handle it. No kidding, it's not. We've been taking money away from it for decades. So we invested all this money, but now exactly what you think would happen after, now that COVID is theoretically, as far as the administration and governments, it's mostly over.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking about China and stuff like that, where now it's just ramping up.
When I was little, I used to get strep throat all the time.
Yeah.
So they would prescribe me like a Z-Pack, which is that penicillin or
It's
or
an
a
antibiotic,
form?
but yeah.
Yeah, it's a form. And then, eventually my doctor was like, you can't just take these all the time. You got to. So eventually, instead of just doing that, I would suffer through it a little bit, drink my tea, eat my garlic, and I'd eventually be okay. Is that possible with something like gonorrhea? Can you beat it naturally, or do you really need...
You actually need it. You actually need an antibiotic.
Okay.
Historically...
It's not something that will go away.
It's not. Before we had antibiotics, it was chlamydia, especially since the 1500s for sure. It was chlamydia, syphilis, and gonorrhea, and nothing could cure it. There was a bunch of like symptom cures, like mercury treatment for syphilis, but that creates its own
Mercury poisoning.
imaginable problems. But that was the best there was at the time, and so you have to take an antibiotic for it.
So my follow-up to that question, though, is if you, like, obviously if it's the strain is resistant to medicine and you're living with gonorrhea, do we know what long-term effects of that are? Like,
So
will your dick fall off?
Syphilis makes you go crazy, right?
Yeah.
So
That's the king's
There's
one.
actually, in science, we actually study the effects of syphilis. There was a long study that was done in
Oh,
Alabama.
yeah, that was fucked
the
up.
Tuskegee syphilis study. It's quite famous.
We
Pretty
have
much
talked about it on
anyone
here. It's really
that works
fucked
in
up.
medicine and public health has to study it at some point or another. And so I don't want to get too lectury because
Yeah.
I teach my student. We talk about this in class all
Yeah.
the time.
This is fascinating.
So when people
Let's
when they
crash this
started that
class.
study
Yeah.
in 1932. And so there was a lot of racism involved in this particular study. But in 1932, penicillin antibiotics didn't exist at the time. And this was, we're talking about syphilis now, so it's a little different.
Right.
And so when antibiotics became available in the 1940s,
And they kept a few.
the doctors specifically, or all the people involved in this study specifically, didn't treat all of the people in this study to see what the progression of the disease was. And that went on to the 70s. So it was 40 years, way after they had stuff available. And so I won't go too much further into it, but so we know the progression and it's not good with certain things. I don't know, because it's against medicine to follow the progression when we have something.
Got it.
Ultimately, we have to deal with it the second we...
Got it.
And we haven't encountered one that's not treatable yet.
So we don't yet, No.
But it's certainly, it's going to mutate, and it's absolutely going to happen. And to answer your previous question about what do we do about it, really it becomes a
Never have
problem.
sex again.
It becomes a problem of having safer sex, which is a constant conversation.
Yeah.
We know that people aren't doing it. We also have PrEP and all of these things that protect you from things like HIV, but
don't protect against others.
and so people that are on PrEP are often seeing an increase in other STIs because all of a sudden now you're having more sex. You're not using a condom because you're no longer afraid of, right? You're no longer afraid of HIV. And so now everybody's getting everything else.
Well, and not to mention, this is what we're having a problem with in the adult film industry currently is you can have gonorrhea in your throat and or your anus. When you go to test through blood and urine, which is how we get tested every 2 weeks, it's not showing up. So the gonorrhea is still being passed around through oral sex or through anal sex, and it's just not being tested because you actually have to go in and swab the throat and or swab swab the anus to get an accurate reading whether or not you have gonorrhea in any of those places. So testing for it in what we were doing was so subpar, and no one really knew it until it kind of got out of control. And everyone was like, how is everyone popping for gonorrhea? And we're all getting tested. And then it was the swabs.
It's such a huge one, the throat.
Because
Definitely.
through oral sex.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
And
being
it's
transferred.
The safer of the sexes, even though it's absolutely
Right.
still sex.
Yeah.
But it's the safer of them, but you can absolutely pass it from your throat to the penis.
Dang.
Yeah, and you think about it when you're having sex, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to put a condom on during sex, but are you putting a condom on to give a blowjob
No
or
way.
to give oral sex?
They do
you
suggest
know,
it,
like
right?
they
But
do, but
absolutely.
no one is doing that.
Agreed.
And
And
so
No one wants
that's
a
how
condom
it's
in their
getting
mouth.
around.
Gross.
They have the ones that have flavors.
And
Try
so-
the flavors. I don't know.
But even right before we started doing this podcast, and I was saying, like, because there's so much going around right now, I'm making all of my partners test by swabs and by blood and urine, and I'm having them do it 24 to 48 hours before our scene. And you said that could even still cause a problem because it really matters.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the symptoms won't, or not the symptoms, but you could have it and still like not test positive for it, like it hasn't almost like set in, right?
Kind
Does
of,
that
yeah.
make sense?
But yeah, so there's going to be a window.
Right, the window. That's
window.
the window of the scary. Yeah.
And so it's highly unlikely if you're testing for the past 24 hours, but
Yeah.
it's really going to depend on what everybody was doing within that time frame. There's
Yeah.
no 100% guarantee ever.
Yeah, I know. It's
Even
terrifying.
condoms aren't 100%.
No,
right?
yeah.
And so this is just something that we have to be aware of. And all we can do is be as conscious of it
Yeah.
as a problem as we can be. And people are still going to have unprotected sex.
Of course,
and bareback
that's
sex,
the
'cause
best way to have sex. Let's be honest.
But then there's all these potential repercussions, and it does
I
get a
agree.
little scary when we can't fight some of these things.
Yeah.
And so
I have a question for you, Dan. So you admitted that yes, you have had gonorrhea.
Chlamydia.
Chlamydia, not gonorrhea. Okay, so question. It doesn't matter because this question goes a blanket either way. So when you found out you had that, did you have one partner, and did you call that partner? Did you have multiple partners, and did you call those people?
It was one partner, and she was actually the only lady I've been with in the adult industry.
Okay.
So, I met her at a Gelson's, and,
that's a supermarket, everybody.
Yeah,
I met her at
grocery
Gelson's,
store, yeah.
and, she told me, I was like, and she was dressed very
It's a swanky grocery
scantily.
store.
It is.
And so I started talking to her, and, I was like, yeah, what do you do for work? She's like, I'm a dancer. Followed her on IG, and I was like,
Ballet,
this is a little
tap.
different. And I was like, oh, she's a stripper. And then I found out she was actually in the porn industry. And so, we go out on a date, and I thought, because she was in the industry, she had been tested very
Yeah.
recently. And
Yeah.
she was like, I'm fine, I'm non-reactive.
Yeah.
And so 2 days later, I go to pee, and it just
Burns.
hurt like all get out. And I was like, this is not normal.
Oh, no?
This is not normal at all. So I called her, and I was like, I thought you had been tested recently. And,
Yeah.
And she was just like, I'm sorry. I
It
also
happens.
I have a boyfriend as well. And I was like, okay.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
But they were in an open thing.
Yeah.
And
That's
this
pretty
is,
common now.
I just kind of, I've stopped sleeping around so much,
Yeah. It's hard. It's a hard thing to do, especially here in Los Angeles with all these beautiful people. But you can't trust anyone.
No.
You can't trust them.
Or we can use more condoms.
Yeah.
If the alternative is
I
not having
hate
sex,
that.
if the alternative is not having sex,
Yeah.
Dr. Eddie, we started with a condom. So
condom to
That
bareback is
counts
pretty
for something.
common.
Yeah.
It's its own like
it's like, this feels really good.
it's
you know
its
what?
own thread.
I'm safe now that I've been inside you. Let's just, I've been tested recently.
I love how it really is a game of like how much does each person care right at that moment of entry. Do you care enough? Do you care
Well,
enough?
you almost
Do
want
care?
them to want you to wear a condom
Yeah.
because then you trust them more.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden it becomes more intimate when you take it off because your
Yeah.
level of trust is
Yeah.
different.
The
Yeah.
fact you had one is
Right.
like, oh,
Oh.
Right.
he's safe occasionally, but I'm special.
All of these things are somewhat problematic if we're talking about something like super gonorrhea.
100% are 100%
But that
problematic.
is the real world. This
no,
is
but
what's happening.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'm the biggest to say all the time, like, I fucking hate condoms. I think they are rape to my vagina. I am not a fan. But I realize that in normal society, that is something that we do need to use more of, or just everyone be testing on a regular basis. Yeah. I have started testing in between every single partner I have, mainly so I can point blame. But also, it's fun just to know, Just
testing as a weapon. I guess that's an option.
That's exactly. I almost, because I was telling you guys before the show, I'm MILF of the month next month. Yay! And thank you. And so I have to do all of these shoots, and I was like being like super careful about like what I'm doing, and I almost want to be like, I wonder if I can make them sign a contract that says like you will not have sex with anybody in between the time you tested and having sex with me, and if I find out I got anything, like I'm coming after you.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's smart.
Because it would ruin all the rest of my money for the month. Do you know what I'm saying?
It's like when people used to get tested for COVID, but then they'd like go to a Lakers game.
Right,
and then,
right.
Dude, like
we've actually
and then show up at Christmas.
You're just with a million people.
Yeah, yeah.
In public health, we often talk about having learned a lot of these lessons that
through COVID.
COVID, we've already learned the masking lessons, the school lessons. All of those things have happened before.
Yeah.
It's not the first pandemic that has happened.
Right.
It's just how we've labeled things, right? But all of those lessons have occurred before, but we have a really short memory.
Yeah.
And so we don't prioritize a lot.
Mine's shorter than most, but yes. A lot of marijuana, folks.
Outside
a lot
of public
marijuana.
Health, the memory is really short, and it creates constant problems. And COVID wasn't the last one that we're going to have to deal with. And super gonorrhea is slightly specific if you're engaged in sexual behavior, but at some point there's going to be others, because antibiotic resistance is happening when we go to surgery. We often get antibiotics, so like surgery is going to be impacted, and like all of these other things that have nothing to do with STIs are also being impacted by antibiotic resistance, which is kind of at the core of what we're saying when we're talking about super gonorrhea.
See, that's so scary, because I've been one of those people. I treat antibiotics like they're a magic pill all of the time. All of the time.
They've been called the magic bullet for 50 years plus.
Yeah.
So the magic bullet of
I feel like I've been ruining myself.
Well, I mean, so after you're on antibiotics, they often suggest that you have yogurt for your microbiome because it's killing a bunch of things, right? All of those things are pretty normal.
Okay.
You're not necessarily hurting yourself. You're potentially hurting whatever you're trying to treat if you're not using it correctly.
Interesting.
But like if someone has a cold, in some cultures, it's quite common to go to the doctor to get antibiotics, but a cold is a virus typically and not an antibiotic. So you can't treat a virus with antibiotics.
Ooh.
Right? And so, but that's quite common depending on where you live around the world. And so it's an issue here in the U.S. because we have a functional health system, let's say functional health system.
Yeah.
But in other countries, it's even worse because they might not.
I have a question, and it's probably a dumb one, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Okay.
No such thing.
So, wait till you hear it. Okay. So, if sometimes I have to be on an antibiotic, but I also have like a fun event I have to go do, like in between taking those antibiotics, I will like take the first half of them, and then I'm like, all right, now I'm going to go drink for these few days. So I don't want to take the antibiotic because I don't want the alcohol to mix it. Ooh. So I'll go drink for those day or two or whatever it is, and then I'll come back and soberly finish the rest of the antibiotic. Is that safe?
That's exactly how we get antibiotic resistance.
You are the reason we have super gonorrhea.
Only. I don't know about super gonorrhea, but that's exactly. You have to take it the course prescribed, right?
Yeah.
So depending on what we're talking about, some are like 7 days, some are more.
Yeah. That's a long time, though.
Absolutely, and some are impacted if you're out in the sun.
Yeah.
Like there's a bunch of variations depending on what it is that we're talking about. Stopping in the middle is creating that amplification and of those that are resistant.
Yeah.
Right there.
So you stop, and like the resistant ones
are the ones that then
they multiply then, and then.
But then I come back and kill them with the rest.
No, because by then the ones that weren't killed off in the first place are the ones that are multiplying. And that's exactly how it happens.
All right,
but you're not alone, so don't.
Yeah.
You're not alone. A lot of people do that, but it's those kinds of behaviors with antibiotics that are leading us in this direction, creating a problem.
So the lesson is drink on your antibiotics.
No. That actually creates different problems. If you're on antibiotics, maybe just take a break.
Got
for
your
a
back.
You're right.
Got your back.
I know.
I'm
That's what
outnumbered.
they always say.
I'm
Like,
outnumbered.
anytime my doctor hands me an antibiotic, he goes, maybe take it easy on the alcohol this week. And I thought maybe take it on easy on the alcohol was like a suggestion. And I was like, oh, I won't take alcohol with the pills. But if I need to be at an event where I need to have a drink or two and to be social.
A drink or two is probably not an issue. But
Oh, that's all I'm doing.
but
I'm
that's
not like getting
typically
blasted.
what people are doing, right?
Yeah.
Because here in the U.S., where binge drinking is typically the
Can you
approach.
smoke on antibiotics? Smoke weed?
You
Yes.
can. That doesn't matter though.
Yeah.
Or well,
dude.
I
Yeah.
mean, not that I know of. It doesn't matter at all. But someone.
I've had doctors tell me I can still smoke. I've asked
Have
that
you tried
question.
like those like little weed like drinks like the
Yeah.
bubbly? I
Yeah.
like those. 2, you're good. 3, you're like, I gotta go.
Cannot move.
Yeah. I gotta get out of here.
Things have gone wrong. Things have gone
I
south.
gotta go home and take my antibiotics.
We've gone off the rails, folks.
Okay, do we need
All
any
right.
more on super gonorrhea? What?
I mean,
Can I-
I think we've covered all the bases.
Okay.
It does have repercussions if that's where we end up.
Yeah.
And
Which we
don't-
will. That's what you're telling me.
I mean, inevitably, it's going to mutate to a point where we don't have something for it.
hopefully I'm dead by then. All right, you guys.
There's
And-
no specific time frame because it can happen whenever. But we're going in that direction, and we're going in that direction quite fast.
Whoa, so scary. Are you guys, please be safe out there. In conclusion to this, test more often, use condoms when you can, be swabbing. When you go and get tested, there are swabs that you can specifically ask for. You can ask them to swab your throat and your anus. And
You can do it yourself, too.
You also can do it yourself. But also, just so you know, I very much know that you don't have to be having anal sex in order to get gonorrhea in your ass. It strictly comes from the fluids that could be dripping into your asshole. So if someone with gonorrhea is riding your dick and they just came and it slides into your asshole, you have gonorrhea in your ass. All right? So just be careful out there, folks. Know that it can happen, and
Can
it
you
is
get it
happening.
from eating ass?
100%. Yeah. Its biggest transportation is through oral sex, by the way, kids. So just be careful out there and know that it is out there and it's coming for you. No, I'm just kidding. I hope it's not coming. I hope it's not coming for you, but
Literally coming for you.
Literally,
It's coming
gonna
everywhere.
splash in your face. Just be careful out there, kids. That's all I can say to you. Until then, Dan, you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yes, Dan Faustian on Instagram, PAUSTIAN. Hard Lemonade LA is my comedy and rock and roll show here in Los Angeles, and then at Line Cook Energy on Instagram is my podcast.
Love it. And Dr. Eddie, thank you, of course, for all your public health perspective. We appreciate you for being on top of the super gonorrhea. We appreciate it.
I'm coming to class.
Right? All right, guys. Until next time, adios.